Welcome back to the IBSP. Here's your host, Foxy New.
Canelo Alvarez can now be beaten by Bud Crawford and David Benavidez. And look, let's break it down honestly and objectively as possible. And just because I'm saying that Bud and Benavidez can beat Canelo Alvarez, I'm not saying they will beat Canelo Alvarez. See, the reason why I'm even discussing this is that Canelo Alvarez is no longer in his prime, no longer at his absolute best, and Canelo Alvarez is on the downslope of his career. That doesn't mean he's still not an elite fighter. He's still a pound-for-pound fighter, and he can still beat both of those guys on any given day. So make no mistake about it, Canelo Alvarez is still talented enough to beat both of those guys. But I'm also saying that Canelo Alvarez is no longer at his best. So when I imagine those two fights, when I view those two fights, if Canelo fights David and when he fights Bud, I have to take into consideration that the Canelo that's going to be walking into the ring is not the same Canelo Alvarez that was fighting Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, that version of Canelo Alvarez that fought Gennady Golovkin, when he fought all of those dangerous and top-level opponents. This is not that Canelo. This Canelo is on the downslide of his career. He's coming off of, years of being able to get a stoppage. This Canelo Alvarez is very lethargic in the ring. This is not the same Canelo Alvarez at his prime and at his peak. And that's not a diss or hate to Canelo Alvarez, because he's still an excellent fighter, and he's obviously a Hall of Famer, and he's a two-time undisputed champion. Much respect to Canelo. But when I break down the fight, I have to take into consideration Canelo Alvarez's last opponent and last performance against William Skull. I can't simply dismiss that because William Skull ran in the fight. I cannot dismiss it because Canelo Alvarez still played a part and a role in that fight. Canelo Alvarez and William Skull set a 40-year record, broke a 40-year record for the fewest punches thrown over 12 rounds. That's absolutely disgusting. A prime Canelo Alvarez would have found a way. He would have upped his work rate, and he would have got the stoppage against the level of an opponent as a William Skull. But an older Canelo Alvarez no longer in his prime, he's not going to be able to perform the same way, and you clearly see that. Yes, he got the victory. Yes, William didn't want to engage, but at the same time, this is not a prime Canelo Alvarez we're talking about. Now, when we compare Canelo Alvarez and David Benavidez, the reason why I think David is going to be such a challenge for Canelo if they match up at this point is that David is big, he's young, he has a lot of pressure, and he throws a lot of punches. That's going to be a problem for a declining Canelo Alvarez. I'm sorry, but it just is. It's going to be a very difficult fight for Canelo to contend with a massive fighter who's throwing a ton of punches and who's young, hungry, and fresh, while Canelo Alvarez is on the downslide of his career. But with that being said, that doesn't mean Canelo can't get the win. David makes a lot of mistakes in his fight, and Canelo Alvarez is an elite counterpuncher, and he can capitalize on that. David is going to be there to be hit. Now, the interesting thing is the way I'm viewing the fight, based on both of these guys and where they're at in their respective careers, I have to label that as a 50-50 fight. Canelo Alvarez and David Benavidez, in my opinion, is now a 50-50 fight. It was once a fight where I thought Canelo Alvarez would get a stoppage. Now it's a fight where I believe it would go to a decision, and it would be a 50-50 fight between these two guys. And that's no diss or hate at Canelo. It's just the way I see it when I see a declining Canelo Alvarez. Now, when I look at a Terrence Bud Crawford and I compare a potential Canelo-Bud Crawford fight, I see a few things. The first thing I see is I see that Canelo Alvarez is actually younger than Bud Crawford on paper, but he's actually older than Bud Crawford in the ring. And what I mean by that is Canelo Alvarez has a lot more miles than Terrence Crawford. Canelo has a bad knee, had surgery on his hand. Canelo Alvarez has been in many wars. And you look at a Bud Crawford, he's pretty much fresh. I mean, this guy basically fights on average about once a year. The guy doesn't fight elite competition. He's never fought an elite fighter. The hardest fight of his career was Israel Madrimov. Canelo Alvarez has been in with Gennady Golovkin, Dmitry Bivol, Floyd Mayweather, Sergey Kovalev. So he's been in with killers across multiple weight classes, while Bud Crawford's hardest fight was a guy with 10 fights. So Bud Crawford is undoubtedly much more fresh, much younger in the ring than Canelo Alvarez. So you have to take that into consideration. But Crawford is also a natural counterpuncher, and he's going to be looking to catch Canelo coming in. He's also going to be faster than Canelo Alvarez on the night of the fight. And he also has a height and a reach advantage over the declining Canelo Alvarez. So Canelo Alvarez is at a lot of disadvantages in a Bud Crawford fight. I mean, you're talking about Bud Crawford, who's going to be the fresher fighter, the faster fighter, the fighter with the longer reach, the fighter with the height advantage as well. He's an IQ heavy fighter. So when you look at it, you see that that's going to be a challenging fight for Canelo Alvarez, a guy that's going to be constantly moving, looking to catch Canelo Alvarez coming in and looking to get out of the way and not really trying to stand there for what's coming back. And Canelo Alvarez's slow feet has gotten even slower, so that's going to be another problem when he's fighting a Bud Crawford. But with all of that being said, Bud Crawford is still not a perfect fighter. He can still get caught. Canelo Alvarez is still doing excellent body work on his opponents, even William Skull. He's still elite to the body. So with all of that being said, Canelo Alvarez can still catch Bud Crawford. We see that Canelo Alvarez has that ability, and I label this also as a 50-50 fight because this is a declining Canelo. Now, if this was a prime Canelo, I would have Canelo stopping Bud Crawford within 6 rounds. That's just the honest truth. But this is not a prime Canelo. And when you look at Bud Crawford, he's very, very fresh. Now, some people say, well, Bud Crawford's 38. He's old. You're talking about a number compared to being an old or a young boxer in the ring. In the ring, Bud Crawford has been in no wars. Bud Crawford barely fights once a year. Bud Crawford is extremely fresh for his age. Most guys that age are not that fresh. Canelo Alvarez is younger than him and is nowhere near that fresh. He's been in too many wars to even compare. So let's just be honest and unbiased about it. Canelo Alvarez is going to be fighting a fresh Terrence Crawford who's going to be moving, who's faster, longer reach, height advantage. I think this is a 50-50 fight at this point. And the judges, you never know what they're going to say. So at the end of the day, when I look at it, I see this as a 50-50 fight. But even with that being said, I still think Canelo Alvarez can beat Bud Crawford. I still think he can beat David Benavidez. I think those are winnable fights for Canelo, and I'm not counting him out. I'm simply saying Canelo Alvarez is not the runaway winner in those fights as he would have been in the past.